Southern California's Inland Empire was among the hardest hit regions in the nation in terms of failed businesses, job losses, and home foreclosures in the wake of the Great Recession. But the area has since bounced back and is among the leaders in affordable real estate, new business startups, and job growth in the state. Yet the Inland Empire, which includes all cities in both Riverside and San Bernardino counties, does not have the favorable reputation that many of its citizens and business leaders believe it deserves. In this Regional Insights segment, we feature a recent talk by Chris Thornberg, founding partner of Beacon Economics. This spring, Chris was the keynote speaker at a conference on business attraction, retention, and growth, co-hosted by the Inland Empire Regional Chamber of Commerce and California CEO. In his presentation, Chris Thornberg presented his office's research and analysis, which illustrates the economic and lifestyle advantages of the inland Southern California region.
Started by telling you a little about Beacon. I started Beacon back in 2006, and we do work across the state, not the least of which is probably right here in the Inland Empire. I have a long relationship with the area. Back in when I was still with UCLA, I was doing a little bit of work out here. Our first forecast conference when I started Beacon Economics was here in the Inland Empire, and today I'm happy to tell you that we still do an annual event out here. In all due respect to our host, the premier forecast in the Inland Empire with UC Riverside, and you know, as part of the work, our growing work with UC Riverside, is being involved with these sort of organizations. That is to say, helping development efforts get off the ground, largely, of course, by bringing, I think, to the table a lot of the relevant facts and statistics we need to know in order to kind of make appropriate decisions about moving things forward. It is funny looking at that video because, wow, it does paint a grim picture, and in all due respect, obviously if you're working for an organization like yours, you're going to see the problems. But if you take a step back and look at the economy as a whole in the Inland Empire, you get a lot different picture. But before I get there, I'm going to take a quick step back and kind of give you a picture of what's happening in the broader economy, as the case may be. If you weren't paying attention last Christmas, Santa Claus came to town in a relatively large way. Right off the bat, we saw at the end of the year solid acceleration in domestic demand. Labor markets turned a very real corner. Credit is expanding on many levels. We, of course, had the wonderful little late year gift of rapidly declining oil prices. And of course, California, written off by many as, shall we say, a failed economy because of our bad business climate. Quite the opposite is right now surging ahead at a very real level. And all these positive trends are continuing right into 2015. Yeah, we're going through a bit of a slowdown in the Q1, just like we had last year. But unlike last year, this one's not going to go negative. And candidly, again, all the forces are transitory. We have the additional benefit this year of worker wages about to start rising, interest rates, which have been such a nice boost. Well, they're not rising. They're not really going anywhere. Financial markets have not gotten into a bubble yet, although if that trends continue, they might and then by the next year or so. But right now, it's still relatively stable. Housing market is yet again starting to accelerate. Commercial activity is picking up. And, of course, on net, those gas prices will continue to fuel us because we expect those to stay low for a while. So lots of good news out there, to say the very least. One of the big drivers, of course, of the U.S. economy is the fact that consumers have been spending more and more. In fact, they added about 1.72% to the economy last year, and will add probably a similar amount over the course of this year, largely because, of course, payrolls have been growing at a very good basis. Last year, the U.S. economy added a little over 3 million jobs. A lot of folks have talked about how that's the best number we've seen since the late 1990s. Now, mind you, we have to keep in mind that in the late 1990s, that was a it was a very, very hot economy. In fact, almost a little too hot, as a lot of us know, benefit of hindsight, having to do with the technology things going on. This time around, that 3 million jobs is really finally starting to get out of the jobs hole that formed over the course of the Great Recession. In other words, these are the numbers that we need to start turning the corner to get to a healthy labor market, wages starting to rise. The U6, which of course includes the underemployed and discouraged workers, continues to fall actually at a more rapid pace now than it did before. Again, relatively good news for workers out there because those markets really are starting to tighten up. California, and it's funny, about 6-7 months ago I was at a bond buyer conference in San Diego. Bond buyer conference, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is when various sellers of bonds, typically a bunch of public agencies get together with buyers of bonds, and they have a bunch of events. There's a bunch of economists, a whole bunch of actuaries, a lot of financial bond people. In other words, it's probably the most boring conference you could ever possibly go to. But we were on a panel, and the head of my panel was an economist from Standard & Poor's, and she sent this question out to us. She said, looking back a few years, 2009, 10, everyone was saying that California would fail like Greece to Detroit. Things look different now. What has happened to turn things around? Well, the first thing I had to correct was this idea. First of all, not everyone was saying that. In fact, the idea that California was going to fail like Greece or Detroit is candidly completely preposterous at every level. Yes, we had a tough go-around. There's no doubt about it. When you think of what happened in California in 2008, 2009, you have to understand we were the center, and by the way, Inland Empire was the center of the subprime collapse. You think of lending and the bubble economy that formed at the back end of that, it was enormous, and of course, when you took all that energy away, the subsequent collapse really hit our economy much harder in other places. But those are all transitory effects. They're cyclical effects. They're not structural issues. Structural issues are the kind of things that tell us what's going to happen over the next decade. Cyclical issues are the things that are going to go away in a couple of years when the forces of that cycle start to fade away. Indeed, what you're looking at now is the fact that those forces, those negative forces that hit our economy so bad in 2008, 2009 have really started to leave. And the underlying strength of the California economy is coming back. Yes, you've heard it all. We're overregulated. We're overtaxed. People, that's probably true at some level, to be perfectly honest with you. But here's what's not true. People and businesses fleeing. Quite the opposite. Does anybody drive on the highway on the way over here today? Weren't you begging some of those people to go ahead and move to Texas as soon as possible, right? Please get out of my way. It's funny because it is this thing. Here's the reality. Is this a good business climate state? No. Does it matter? Not that much. Because every economy in the U.S. has certain positives and certain negatives. And here's the key. While California is a tough place to do business, it nevertheless is the best place to do business in the country in many ways, from a vantage of location and climate and the people who are here. And I could go through a whole litany of universities and everything here. It points up. And really, in a sense, it doesn't mean the business climate is an issue. In fact, one of the reasons we work with chambers of various sorts is because of the fact that the mission of the chambers is to help improve the business climate. But it's not because if we don't do it, we're all going to collapse. It's because when we improve the business climate, guess what? We make all our lives a little better. And that's a great thing for us to be working on, to say the least. So how good is it? Well, it's funny, there's a bit of an issue. A few years ago, the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics in Washington, D.C., they used to allow the State Employment Development Department, the EDD, to do their job estimates. About 4 years ago, they decided to take it back because they didn't think the EDD was doing a good job. Well, needless to say, now that D.C. is taking it back, let's just say they haven't been doing a very good job. In fact, it's been kind of a mess. And what's interesting is at the beginning of every single year, we get a big re-benchmark. That is to say, they get some new data and they completely redo their estimates for the previous 15 months. And this is what I want to show you because I think it's it's a nice picture of what's been happening. Back in 2012, we started growing a little bit more. We started the year growing at about 1%, but we got a little bit of acceleration, 2%, slowed down towards the end of the year, 1.5%. That's what they said. And we got to the new benchmark, and they go, well, actually, that didn't happen. In fact, we grew close to 2.5% during 2012, but then through 2013, we saw a big deceleration down to about 1.5% again, right? So things have slowed down already. And then we got to the beginning of 2014, and they said, well, it turns out we screwed that one up too. And the economy actually was growing well over 3% all the way through 2012 and 2013. But they told us it slowed down to 2% at the end of the year. We saw a slowdown in job growth in California at the end of the year. So among my office at Beacon Economics, the question wasn't, was it going to be an upward revision? The question was, how big of one? We had a little office pool on that one. I didn't win, as the case may be. But as it turns out, the revisions look something like this. Now, basically, for 3 straight years, the California economy has been adding well over 3% to its labor force on an annual basis. And of course, what that means is over the last 20 years, California has added about 30% to its overall payroll labor force, compared to that 20% for the balance of the United States. In other words, failed economy, quite the opposite. Indeed, we're probably one of the leading economies out there right now. And by the way, I put this in perspective. That means the California economy added, what was it, about 500,000 jobs last year? I think that's what the number was. Wait, no, not half. Was it 500,000? Yeah, I think like 500,000. Which is, yeah, 500,000 jobs. And to put that in perspective, that's 100,000 more than Texas did last year. That's indeed, we beat Texas out. And of course, that means about 1 out of every 6 jobs in the United States was formed right here in the state of California. Now, where, of course, well, the answer is a broad mix of areas were revised upwards. But here they are, the biggest economies in the state. San Jose, number 1 on the list, 5% growth there, not much of a surprise. And then the big surprise comes with number 2 and number 3 from a growth perspective. That would be, of course, Fresno and the Inland Empire. Number 2 and 3 in the state. Inland Empire added 4.4% to its labor force over the course of the last year. Big numbers. Lots of new jobs out there. Well, where are all those jobs coming from? One, year-on-year basic, logistics. Of course, one of John Husing's favorite sector, as he likes to talk about all the time. Definitely on fire. 12.6% there. But number 2 on the list, 11% growth in administrative services. These, of course, back office operations of various sorts, growing very, very, very well right now. Professional services, up 7%. Professional jobs, by the way, that's high-paid occupations of all sorts of various sorts, from architects to lawyers and accountants, wholesale trade, construction growing very nicely, financial activities growing very nicely, hospitality. Interestingly enough, only 1.1% in terms of manufacturing, but guess that, that's one of the better numbers in the state. In fact, it's probably one of the only economies in the state adding manufacturing jobs right now. Lots of good trends, lots of things happening out here. And of course, probably what's most impressive about this, maybe not even so much about the 4.2% addition to jobs, creating overall about 1.3 million jobs out here right now. And to put this in perspective, by the way, the Inland Empire economy, if you stripped it away from Orange County and LA County, as the case may be, again, 4 million people, you're talking about an economy that's actually about the same size as Pittsburgh. This is a big economy. What's funny is people forget that all the time because, you know, there's this constant sort of comparison to what's due west of here. But if you take a look at here, what's interesting is we've got 1.3 million jobs out here, but you have about 1.9 million people in the labor force out here. Oh, and by the way, the unemployment rate for that labor force is about 6.5%, which is 2.4 percentage points lower than it was last year. So very solid numbers across the board, to say the very least. Now, where's all those workers coming from? Well, as you probably know, it has a lot to do with commuting. One of the most important parts of the labor force here are the people who actually get in their cars and drive west on a daily basis for jobs in Orange County and LA. Very large numbers here, and of course that's been growing very rapidly over the course of the last couple of years as well, with the overall increase of jobs back west of here. How important is this? Well, we did some commuting studies on this. And one of the things that's interesting is the average worker who lives in the Inland Empire but works in Orange County or LA actually makes more money than a worker who lives here in the Inland Empire or works here in the Inland Empire. These tend to be higher skilled higher income workers, but typically kind of in family range, the case may be in the 30s, 40s, that kind of range. And they're making a lifestyle decision. They will prefer to live out here and commute in because they like the fact that you can get a nicer house, you can have a yard, you get a little elbow space, like the school district, whatever the case may be, they have chosen to be out here. And that's a very important part of the overall economy here. One of the biggest advantages out here, of course, has to do with the fact that it is still relatively affordable. If you look across California and say, what's the one biggest problem the state has, the answer is actually the very, very high cost of housing, which in turn is generated by the fact that we don't build enough housing. We have 12% of the nation's population. For the last 20 years, we've built about 8% of new housing, to put that in perspective. Result of that, worse affordability in the continental United States. We have one of the worst overcrowded housing situations. And yeah, a lot of people do leave. But the people who leave California are not high-income earners. In fact, it's low-income earners, people who can't afford a living here. A house here, you know, proper, I want a nice house. Can't afford it here because I'm only making $60,000 a year. I'm going to move to Texas, as the case may be. And if you look at that pattern of migrations in and out of state lines, lower-income folks leave, higher-income folks move into the state. Now, that disadvantage at the national basis is actually the advantage here in the Inland Empire. Because one of the biggest flows of people into the area are people, again, leaving those high housing costs behind and moving in from Los Angeles and Orange County. And indeed, the forces of migration, which were so powerful at the start of the decade, look at this, a couple of years, 100,000 net people moved into the Inland Empire. Now that went, of course, flat over the course of the downturn, but it's just now starting to be positive again. People, again, are looking into this area, and there's jobs, there's opportunities, and, of course, there's housing. And people are coming here. And you're starting to see it. You're starting to see the investment in the ground level stuff. You have new structures, non-residential structures starting to grow, particularly in San Bernardino. You have non-residential alterations, fixing of existing structures, very heavy, growing in Riverside. And housing permits finally starting to pick up a bit as well. That's going to be an ongoing process. You know, I remember a few years ago in the depth of the downturn, there were people talking about how the Inland Empire was going to have another 1990s. Remember how rough 1990s were, and there were vast tracts of empty houses. Forget about it. You know, the inventories of homes for sale right now is 3 months supply. The vacancy rate's been falling very, very rapidly. Prices are going up. There's more demand for housing. There's no excess supply out there. And indeed, very quickly, as long as the area builds for it, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Inland Empire didn't end up being one of the top 10 fastest growing economies in the next 2 years again, because all the advantages are here. It's as simple as that. Now, one of the big questions might be, is there enough water? What about this drought? Does this influence our feelings on things? The answer should be no, not at all. First of all, do we really have a drought? Not really, not yet at least. We have a water shortage, but a drought is a water shortage that carries with it some severe economic consequences. This is a state that's adding well over 3% to its labor force on a year-on-year basis. That doesn't sound like a severe economic consequence at any level. Well, what about the ag communities? Well, actually, ag employment right now is at a 10-year high. And of course, ag earnings, down a little bit from last year, still about 30% higher than they were back in 2010. So even the ag community isn't suffering. And in the end, if you think about the water, always remember that is there enough water to provide, to allow for growth in urban areas like the Inland Empire? The answer is tons of water. The biggest issue we have in California is not a lack of water, but how we use it. Well, just a quick guess. What percent of the California economy is agriculture? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
2%.
How much? 4%? Anyone else? 20%? Anyone else?
I'd say 25%.
25%. Actually, it's 2%. 2. And put that in perspective, they use 80% of the water. So put that in perspective, for every acre-foot of water used in the agricultural community, you got $1,500 of economic output. For every acre-foot in the urban air parts of the economy, we got $215,000 worth of economic output.
What percentage of that 2% of the food export are we looking
Well, it depends on what you mean by feed. For example, probably the biggest waste of water would be in Imperial County. They get an enormous share from the Colorado River. The two major crops out there right now are cotton. And the last time I looked, I haven't eaten cotton in quite a while. Last I looked, it just doesn't agree with me. I don't know what it is. And the other big thing they're growing out there is alfalfa. And of course, again, for food, no, actually it's being put into boxes and shipped to China to feed pigs. So, you know, we're in the midst of a drought and we now have mandatory water cuts. However, we still have enough water to feed Chinese pigs.
I don't know, I read some reports that what you said.
Well, that's the facts. And that's as simple as that. And that's what I'm about, the facts. Ultimately, the problem we have here is the fact that we just have to take a step back and recognize that the water allocation systems are really broken in this state. And when you look at ag still succeeding despite the quote-unquote drought, you start to realize, of course, that we can do a lot more with what we have if we just have proper systems of allocation put into place, as the case may be. And the first step of this, of course, is, again, to get some of these facts out there. So add it all up, things are going well, and you know, you're already starting to think ahead, as well you should. The crisis is gone. It's now time to think ahead, and that's, of course, thinking at the state level, business climate issues, how do we make sure that we have CEQA reform and water use reform, things like that, but also thinking about locally in terms of how you drive economic growth here. And I'll just leave you with a couple words on economic development. I'm not a development guy, never have been. I'm an economist. It's a different field. We're related, we dance a lot together, but I don't pretend I have the answers to how to grow an economy. But I think I can create a framework which helps people to understand things. First of all, when you're thinking about economy, there's two kinds of jobs. There's what we call the internal and external jobs. Internal jobs are jobs that are here to service the local population. Take, for example, retail, hospitals, medical buildings, tax preparers, as the case may be, retail. All these jobs are here because people are here. And by the way, with more people moving here, that's going to be more of those jobs. So in a very real sense, internal jobs are part of the package. They come with overall economic growth. The real big drivers, however, of any community are what we call the external sectors. And external sectors are those sectors that don't basically sell their product to people who live in the area, but sell it to people outside the area. And you think about areas like San Jose, for example, and computer technology. And you have Los Angeles in the movie industry, as the case may be. Obviously, one of the big export industries here in the Inland Empire is logistics, in as much as it's a big part of the local economy. Back office operations are also a big and growing part of the economy. But as time goes on, what you really want to do is be thinking about what I'll call versus short-term versus long-term kind of things. In the short term, take your natural advantages, look at the natural trends, say, for example, logistics, and you work with it. Understanding the logistics, at least in the short term, is a great path ahead. But in the medium to long term, the real success here is going to be, of course, getting higher end jobs, higher paid jobs to go to more skilled individuals. The good news is the labor force is already here. Those are those commuters. It's just a function of now convincing the businesses that take those commuters west every single day to reopen their operations out here. And as the overall Southern California economy grows, that's going to continue to occur. It already was occurring last time. It just got drowned out with all the noise over the housing markets. But this time around, it seems like the real deal. And if you look at the structure of jobs growing out here, you can already see those things coming along. So, the big picture, things are good. And they're getting better. But again, that means it's time to start focusing on midterm challenges. And the best way of doing that, of course, is to work with groups like the Chamber.
For more information on Chris Thornberg and Beacon Economics, visit beaconecon.com. And to learn more about the Inland Empire Regional Chamber of Commerce, click on over to iechamber.org. For Regional Insights at California CEO, I'm Jeff Allen.